back, everyone, to another episode of Adventures in DevOps. And before we get into the episode today, I just want to introduce the sponsor, which is Incident.io. Anyone building a product that promises a high SLA like we are knows that remediation as soon as possible is absolutely paramount. Out-of-date runbooks result in wasted effort at the crucial moment. Often mature tech companies have told us that the real challenge is that no two incidents are exactly alike. And that's one of the reasons I'm appreciative that Incident.io is sponsoring today's episode, because they've got this awesome technology that dynamically assembles incident-specific runbooks. So you know that you're following the most up-to-date steps based on your team's actual workflows and in the context of what's actually broken. They're connected to all the popular tools in the space, and I can honestly say they're the all-in-one incident management platform. And for those paying attention, their founding engineer was on our podcast very recently, and it was a fantastic episode where we deep dived into their cutting-edge technology. As always, the links will be in the description. And now back to the show. Today, I've brought in our guest, Elise Stanley Brevald, VP and Head of UX and Customer Journeys at Unleash. What's the difference between VP and Head?
To me, it's about like who can I get access to when we discuss and when we do chats with customers and stuff like that. A VP is closer to management team and is also focusing more on revenue, on risk mitigation, joining leadership to make sure that we are setting the goals and the expectations.
I think that in each sort of micro organization within even a larger company, these titles end up getting very confused very, very quickly. And some companies believe like head is like the top right under, say, CTO or the CEO, and VP is just the title you give to some of your sales folks, so they sound important on their sales calls.
Yeah. And unfortunately, this is also the same when it comes to customer experience and customer journey, that the better title, the more important. It also means that I actually have the option and the possibilities to actually go in and have an opinion on what's going on in all the different departments. So very often I am the annoying lady in the room, come and sneak peek and make sure that we can actually deliver this world-class experience in all the touch points.
So you have almost, I think I looked at your LinkedIn, almost 30 years in basically UX and user experience, and just focusing on delivering what I assume is the best products to your users as possible.
Yeah, to me, like I entered this space even before we had a name, before we were called UXers. After I left university before Millennium, it was still not normal that we were discussing UX. It was very much like developers coming in, deciding what to build, what to do. And then you had the customers and your user on the side, and they just needed to adapt into the experience. Had no clue what's going on the screens. But that was how it was back then. So in my first years, I was more into business process optimization. I tried to understand better, like from the customer perspective, always advocate for the users.
From what you've described and sort of your experiences, that good UX is blurring the lines with product management, and really these roles or really facets of an organization are getting down to building the right thing. And it's interesting because in almost every episode of this podcast, we end up talking about how it's one of the hardest things to do. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that there's like a lot of distractions that are keeping organizations from actually being able to deliver the right thing today. And it's interesting that the way you talk about it, I've always sort of segregated some of those responsibilities as product management and some of the other ones as a UX team or UX researchers. But the way you talk about it really tells me that, yeah, actually these things are heavily overlapped. How can you think an application or platform should look like without actually understanding where the direction it's going? And that means interacting with the users and understanding what their expectations are. Whereas I feel like a lot of companies actually keep these organizations as separate entities who may not even talk that much.
So until now, in this startup that we are building right now, moving from these, like we started out with 5 people 5 years ago, we haven't had any product managers. So the way we have been organizing this is to, first of all, make sure that we have really skilled employees. And then people will probably argue that you need to have a product manager first. So what we have seen until now is that we haven't had a need for a product manager.
I think that's a really critical mentality you've got here, because I really push the same thing on the engineering side as well. When you're hiring anyone, I think fundamentally you have to understand that the area that you're in or the skills you bring to the table, they're still always to solve some cornerstone area that's really business driven. And I know saying like, what's the business problem or business strategy is such a dirty word in engineering that everyone's like, business, that's something else. We don't need to think about that. There are a lot of failure modes, though, that happen when you have a dedicated UX team. I've seen the opposite side where you have something called a UX team in your organization or your company, and they just create components for every UI element that you could possibly have. And they're off designing fancy UIs and don't actually understand what the users are actually doing or what they need. There was one example from my past where the UX team wanted to help everyone, and they eventually got to our organization, and they were working with one of my teams, and they're like, oh, we should change the UI to do all these different things. And there's a better user experience for them. Having done no research whatsoever on how many people actually use the screen, what they're using it for, what the user journeys are that really need to be solved there. And they're like removing elements and putting things other places. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, honestly, what did you think was going to happen here?
When I start discussing UX, for me, and that's also why I mentioned the UX strategy in the beginning, because as you said, you can outsource the UI if you want to, but UI is for me more like, how does this look and feel? Then you have the interaction design, but then you have the more important thing, and that's the core fundamental thing for me. That is actually going behind the scene. This is really starting to understand what problem is it actually that we want to solve here. And then we can always decide how should that look like later. We can always decide like how should it work. But if we don't manage to ask the fundamental question, what problem are we actually trying to solve? Then we have an issue.
There's two problems I see pretty frequently. The first one is often your customer or your collaborator or your client is asking for something, and this asking them, do you really need that? Or, what's the real problem? They think they want that. It's almost forcing them into an existential crisis of what are they really doing with their lives as far as their business goes, because they may have actually never thought about what it is that they really need. And I found that to be an ongoing challenge with companies at all sizes. You're coming in to help. And you said this at the beginning where, you're getting paid and you just ask a lot of questions and your clients are like unhappy because obviously most people want to be told that their ideas are fantastic and they're doing the absolute right thing, and not that, have you tried doing the exact opposite thing that you have been doing for an extended period of time? I feel like that's a hard sell for a lot of people.
It is. And this is also why it's so important for me to split into what is UI, what is UX, and what is the strategy. Because once you start explaining this, especially if you are internal in a company, when you are inside a larger company, they ask you, can you just deliver this button to me? Or can you change this color of the button? I'm just like, why? And once I start asking that why, they need to argument. And then I will ask one more time, why? And in the end, I will ask them, so it's not because I don't want to do this for you. I just want to make sure that we are really solving the real problem. It's about communication. I remember I was hired in as like UX, like to do this big turnaround in a larger company 9 years ago. They expected me to be the UX expert, coming in, setting the stage, setting the team, show them like, we need to organize like this. I need to have these UX resources. We have these 16 development teams. They would be part of my team, but they will be like this virtual team working very close together with engineering.
Sounds like a mess.
And they said, okay, so what should we do? What do you want us to build? And I said, do you know what? I don't know. And they got so mad. And you are the UX. So I'm just like, yeah, I am, but I don't know all the answers. We need to go out and actually speak to the users. We need to speak to the customers.
I think that's the product management innovation triad. I group the engineers and the business into one group. Realistically, there's external, your users, then internal, wherever that ideas come from. And then I usually throw in competition, because they're not your users, but maybe one would hope that they did some research, which I don't know is actually the case today. And you can benefit from the outcomes of that research without actually having to go through the process yourself. Well, that can lead you in bad directions, especially we see these products that just copy their competitors and they don't actually understand what the core problem is. And then 5 years down the road, their competitors fail, and they fail too, because they didn't understand really what the core problem was, and they were just copying someone else who seemed like they were making money and seemed like it was a good idea at the time.
And I fully agree with you. I really don't like, and I don't believe in copy pasting features.
I absolutely agree. 100%. I'm laughing because I think there's a couple of aspects to this. And one of them is that you're in a lot of organizations where you're leading and you have this mindset. But I also see the other side where there's an engineering organization and they've been beat down into just doing whatever anyone else says, because when they try to ask questions, the customer says, well, I need it to be a link because someone else is paying me money to make it be a link. And so I just need you to do this. I see a lot of people that just don't have it's not necessarily the capacity or the desire to ask the questions, but they're just not empowered to do it.
What I have seen in other companies is that you have this friction between sales and success team versus engineering. Even engineers would sometimes like to speak to the users to actually see, hey, did it actually work? The things I was working so hard on, did you actually like it? I mean, it's a fair question.
There's definitely some different flavors of engineers there who get excited by knowing their thing is being used. But then I know the other ones that are absolutely terrified of being, I have to talk to a user. I don't want to do that.
This is back to the culture. Yes, we have engineers that really, really don't like this, and we should never, ever force them into speaking with users. To me, there's so many other people that would like to do it.
No, but it's interesting you bring that up, though, is because actually, and not this episode, but I think the next one actually will be doing on the DORA report for 2025. And the interesting thing about the report is that it does actually identify that no matter what role you're in an organization, you are creating something, and there's someone else who is using that thing, which means they're a user. So no matter what position you're in a company, you have a user, and by not talking to them, you can only be doing the wrong thing.
What if you have a whole team it's not a one-man show building software, it's a team effort?
I think there's a couple of different aspects here. The first one is for sure that there is a middleman problem, a telephone game, where there is maybe a disconnect on delivering information. So if there is an engineer leading a project and they're trying to figure out what to do there, I would absolutely expect them to be in the call. I may not be expecting them to answer every question, but they should be there to absorb it in a way.
Then we are totally agree, because to me, what's important is that they should join the call. They should be close to the users and also listening into the feedback that we are collecting. But I don't want to take a world-class developer and force him to be the one facilitating the call, or force him to ask all the questions. In the previous jobs, putting a developer in front of a lady who has been learned how to use IT and technology, being responsible for doing the monthly salary in a company, the gap can simply be too much for him. So he can join the call, but he doesn't necessarily really want to ask a lot of questions. I want them to join, but I don't want to force people if they don't like that.
Wow, I have the complete opposite perspective here, which is just fascinating to me. I've seen more engineers at every level be interested in, say, joining calls or talking with whoever the end user are, irrelevant of the technical complexity of the product they're creating. My perspective is it has to do with the scope and the impact that they want to deliver. So for sure, for engineers who are inexperienced, who have just gotten into the industry, I don't expect them to be able to connect all the dots up. There's a ladder of leadership by the author of Turn the Ship Around, which is absolutely fantastic, that talks about what sort of work are you doing? What sort of level is it at? And I find that the jump into, we'll call it staff engineer, actually starts being the point for me where you can't get ahead unless you're able to answer business and product related questions. I just don't see there being a middle ground there where you can just continue down in an engineering focused approach there. And I think the ones that do make the jump, they know this, and that's why they're able to get to principal or higher, because they've seen that, okay, in order for me to actually deliver the right technology, I need to fully understand what the product or business problem is.
Exactly. Always bring them in, has them in as many calls as possible. No matter if this is UXers, if this is success people, if this is engineering people, I want them to be on the call. I mean, people being responsible for documentation should for sure be on the call. We are hearing about the feedback around the documentation. That's the only way we can really improve. Listening into all the great feedback. End of the day, I want my employees, my engineering team, my whole organization to be the one shining. And I would love to have them on the call every time. What we did in the startup a couple of years ago, when we agreed on that, okay, we are actually growing pretty fast. When you are in these large companies, you often see this friction or this gap between sales success versus engineering team. One of the things that was very, very important to me was because I've seen this gap between these two silos in an organization, I promised myself I will never build that silo in this company.
I like the perspective of when you're making your own company, which I guess I have some experience doing. You get to take all the great learnings that you've had over the course of your career and bringing them to it. From experience, though, I see a lot of people sort of making the mistake of, there's a great quote in Jurassic Park 2, when they're talking about making a new dinosaur island. And says, Richard Hammond, I won't make the same mistakes when making the new park. Dr. Malcolm says, no, you'll make all new ones. Because I think there really is this aspect where there are so many things that you can get wrong. And just your list of experiences are only like a small part of everything that the organization can do to be successful or not. And I love your optimism that you can just, go at it. And I think maybe there is this magic number here that maybe like 20 or 30 years in the industry. And now you've accumulated enough anxiety or debt of doing it all the wrong ways. You'd be like, I'm not going to make all the same mistakes if I could go and do it myself.
What I have learned, that this is also one of the reasons of why I'm working so close together with the rest of the departments, is to prevent us from making silos. Of course, you will always have small frictions, small gaps, stuff like that, and especially when we are in this remote first setup. But we are not having the silos when it comes to the customers. And to me, that is super important. And this is something that I will continue protecting as much as I can. When I say we are not in a feature game, one of the most important numbers that we can measure, of course, we are measuring revenue side. What about the loyalty score? What about the satisfaction score? And that's something that we have been measuring from day one in this company.
I was so afraid you were going to say that you measure or optimize for like the dwell time of users like on a particular page, because the engagement score, because that's like the worst possible thing. I don't know if that's worse than a generic NPS, which like a lot of companies use, and just isn't a great metric of whether the success of a product or your company is going further. I like the aspect of actually collecting meaningful feedback is quite better than just asking someone, hey, would you recommend this operating system to your friend? It's like, well, no, I don't often talk about which unless you're an engineer. And then of course you're probably recommending Arch to someone.
Yeah, I'm more into nice food when I speak to my friends.
So one of the problems I've seen in my experience is that the customers where you have the most to learn from are exactly the same set that are most hesitant to share anything with you. I think it's priorities, right? That often their focus is somewhere completely irrelevant from their standpoint in communicating with you. And what I often see is that's the exact sort of feedback that would be helpful in helping them solve whatever their business problem is. Because realistically, I hate to have a solution which is fully 100% self-service, because it means it's never changing itself without your metric collection of data, which of course you can do. And you can either do some sort of anonymous user feedback research or whatever, and collect additional data, what's happening in your UIs or application or APIs. But realistically, actually getting a better understanding of how the business is working and where their focus is tends to be a really hard, challenging problem.
What we are doing is that we are gradually rolling out a new functionality to users. So, and even before, sometimes we are deciding, should we do some rapid prototyping? Should we try to show some of these mock-ups in front of the users? I would say in this company that we are building right now, we don't have that issue, because what we have been working very hard on is making sure that we cannot sell stuff that we don't have, that we haven't built. And that is a super, super strong culture value that we are really protecting a lot. So the whole sales organization, they are not overselling, but we are realistic when we are speaking with customers. What problem can we actually help you solve? We get the feedback because we are measuring the feedback directly inside the product. They can always leave feedback to us. And then, of course, good old reaching out, do surveys. We are focusing a lot on both the quantitative part of measuring, but also the qualitative part.
It sounds like you have a very mature strategy for handling sales within the company at every level, which I applaud you on that. One thing that comes to mind, though, is that it's good to test the boundary of what you're selling. Like if you never sell a feature you don't have, then you could be selling more and you potentially figure out, oh, that's actually something good that we could innovate on by actually adding it to our product.
And this is the interesting one, because of course we get a lot of insight from prospects. Of course they have needs, they also have problems, and we want to understand that better. And sometimes what we actually do as part of the sales process is looping me in or looping in the CTO jumping on the customer call, really carefully listening into what are they asking for, because maybe there's something we haven't seen yet. Maybe this is also a problem that the rest of the customers has. We haven't identified that yet. What I haven't mentioned to you yet is that everyone that has like customer feedback, customer input, prospects input, it could be yourself reading something smart, coming up with something, saw something somewhere else. It could be feedback from our surveys, the NPS, all these kind of things.
I think that having the dedicated spot where you can put in these requests that may align with across multiple customers or even over multiple years. It's interesting because sometimes I do go to ours and I see like, actually, we solved this one accidentally via another process. Like we ended up taking care of it. It's early on, we tried to be strict about what direction we wanted to take with a bunch of our products and found that actually the times that we would potentially say no in a meeting, we're just like, we're going to change our process. Instead of saying no, say, yeah, sure, why not? And then write it down and then see if we change our minds, because I think there is a large number of times where we have gone back to it and thought about it and we're like, no, actually, we had the wrong mentality here. And I think it's a great approach. I think it helps innovate and change your product and have it keep growing in the right direction, which is why, and I really want you to level with me here, why are there so many bad applications out there? And what I mean is with ones with bad user experience. And I have to know, like, do you think that having good UX, is it hard, or are people just lazy?
I don't know if I really can answer that question.
like you can, but you don't want to.
I don't know if I can, but I can answer like from myself. To me, I would never ever like to deliver a product. I would never ever be proud if I'm not deliver a product that has a world-class experience. 18 years ago now ish, I was a consultant. I went into this. It was one of the largest enterprises in Denmark. I was asked to come in and do a facelift on a mainframe. Not easy. But I had to do it, and I managed to do it. The hardest part was actually that they had this design agency who had used so many money. I don't even remember the number anymore, but it was a huge amount of the design. Like this is the new design template. When you communicate on the website, when you are communicating on like in the papers and letters and all these kind of things. And they gave it to me and they says, and by the way, you just need to fix that on these two applications. And I looked at them and I says, do you know what? I can't. And they say, why? We have spent so many money. And I said, I can't do that. Remember, this is a tool for people that will be working in front of this screen 8 hours a day. If I put this primary colors into these screens, you will have a problem with your employees because they will end up not feeling well. You will give them like problems with their eyes because these colors can never work in an application that you have to look at in 8 hours a day. And they got so mad at me. I took a piece of paper, seriously, a piece of paper. I colored it in the colors that they were asking me for. I gave it to the management team of this company. And I said to them, all of you, just look at this now in 30 seconds and then look at the white wall. It was not a nice experience. And then they were convinced.
There is this aspect where we see much worse things get released. And if anyone who works in the accessibility space is probably unfortunately familiar with this one episode of the original run of Pokemon, which I think it like literally would induce a seizure if you watched it. And I was pulled before making it to like outside of Japan. But if you see this and you don't have any sort of epilepsy, I still think that there is some denigration that you will suffer by looking at it because it's just so bad.
Yeah. There are a lot of experiences out there. I just don't want to put my name on experience that is not super nice. To be honest, I can't talk from the rest of the UX world, but we have like, at least from in Scandinavia and in Denmark, we have pretty strong design traditions. And you also see that in furnitures and stuff like that. And I think that's probably why at least I and also I know like people in my community are caring a lot about like high quality interfaces as well. And then of course, accessibility and other things. And I think this could sometimes also be culture related.
I think you're definitely onto something there because realistically, and there can just be a lot of people that are in the peak of the Dunning-Kruger curve, right? Where they think that they are actually trying to do the best they can. And they may even be doing that, but they don't realize all those issues that come, and they need someone like you, Elise, on their staff, leading them and showing them how to actually look at colors on a piece of paper to actually, validate that there's, accessibility problems with their design or usability issues with their application that they're putting out.
I'm more curious actually to figuring out how much do all this new AI probably take over like a lot of the tasks that we are doing in UX and in UI space. I'm pretty curious to actually see like what about the accessibility?
Well, I think the interesting thing about using models to design or even build the components for UIs is one of the things that we keep talking about is expectations when it comes to interacting with any sort of visual application, and not necessarily visual. I mean, I assume the same is true for those that are visually impaired. If you think about just, physical placement or audio signals, we actually want statistically the most common thing for a particular culture, right? Like it may not be synonymous everywhere you go in every single country, but within an area. And so I think this is one of the things where models excel at because they are probabilistic. And so picking the most relevant thing is often the right choice in these areas, and trying to go off the curve is problematic. And the other thing is that I think in the last 5 years or so, accessibility has become a really huge thing, especially throughout Europe, that we are getting specifications involved where the expectations are codified, and models do a really great job in translating. And so from translating from a spec to the expectation. So I think those things included, without any change in technology whatsoever, I think we're at a pretty good height of the creation of UI-based technology, design of components automatically via the tools. And I don't know how much better it needs to get, but also that it can get.
I think one of the best tools that I have actually been testing out so far was Figma Make, which was kind of a surprise for me. I don't know if it's a surprise. Of course, I would expect a great experience, but I've also been trying other tools where I'm just like, oh my goodness, just asking about like a simple, can you help me changing this color from the purple to blue? And then it turns out to change the whole screen and adding like some AI text. I'm just like, oh no, I didn't ask for that. I just asked you very specific to change this color. I think we can get there, but sometimes it's also just still faster for us to actually do minor updates. At least that's where we are now. And maybe if I come back like 6 months from now, we can have a very different conversation here. Yeah.
Well, that's certainly on the table. I do want to just ask about the core functionality of the product that your company is building, just to give a little bit of flavor.
We are working in this feature flag domain. And what we are focusing on when it comes to the feature flag part, either as engineering team or you as a business can decide whenever you want to make your features available for your customers and your users. But what it also opens up is the opportunity to roll out granularly and actually faster to start collecting feedback. It also means that I can actually be in customer conversation with a strategic customer. We can talk about like we are now about to go GA with this, or we are now entering a beta with, I don't know, for instance, our release management functionality. Doing the call, I can actually turn it on for this customer. What we also can do is make sure that we can minimize the risk, because we can actually start rolling this out. And once we're rolling it out, we can actually see the impact. Like, does it seems to have an impact on our performance? Does it break anything in the application and all this kind of?
Uh-oh, she said the trigger words there. I like the aspect to control access to individual features within the application. Interestingly enough, though, I think that using any sort of flags for rolling out software that is untested, or to verify that it doesn't break stuff in production, creates this sort of pit of failure where engineers or engineering organizations end up pushing out work that is now untested because they have a crutch that allows them to test. And from like our own validation and what I've seen at some other companies, they end up in this scenario where they're more likely to break production because of the introduction of a system than to actually do the testing up front. And so one of the questions I actually want to ask you is, how do you encourage teams to have a healthy mindset about not relying on the technology to replace, say, critical testing before actually pushing it out, and leveraging this mechanism as a safety net?
As always, I don't have a single answer to this. One of the answers is that we are working from an MVP mindset. The developers are taking the ownership of actually doing proper testing before we're releasing anything. We can't have developers who just go to work and doesn't care. And this again is back to like, how do we build our organization? How do we manage to build a culture where it's okay to fail, but it's also okay to learn a lot and also feel safe when you're actually doing this? Because we could also have a culture where we are pointing fingers of each other, and we don't want that. As an engineer, you're never left on your own. As an engineer, you will always have your engineering manager. You will always have your squad lead who will guide you, help you, teach you if there's something that you're a bit unsecure around. We still need to have people to review this, but we don't have any dedicated testers. We have people that really cares.
I love it. And you brought up like 3 other topics, which obviously we'd have no time to cover, and we'll have to dedicate individual episodes to building a blameless culture and remote work. But I think maybe that's a good point for us to leave off for the episode and shift over to picks. So yes. Elise, what did you bring for us today?
Maybe you already heard about this. Maybe you haven't. To me, this is pretty interesting. Gemini is now generative UI, which to me seems very promising, but also a bit scary, to be honest. It looks like Google is really trying to disrupt how we have been building websites and how we have been building products. And now they are diving into this like we should have individual user interfaces. So each individual user will have this like generated UI whenever they have a need. I haven't read the article yet. I haven't looked too much into this, but I just want to share with all of you. And for sure, this is something that I will need to dive much more into this upcoming weekend. This is really and can be disrupting.
The idea to go to a chat interface or even a voice interface was always sort of going backwards in a lot of applications. And I think this is the necessary piece that reconnects it back. It's like we've collectively as society picked dedicated interfaces for whatever we're using, a cash register or manufacturing bench, et cetera, the tools you have, or even, the digital widgets you have on your browser. I think we realize that those are the best. In certain areas, we're already doing this without LLMs at my own company, where if there's an incident, we're dynamically generating exactly the dashboard with the metrics you want to see, as well as what code changes were relevant there so that you can go and make a change or, do the investigation. I think we already see that there's a huge value in this. I think there is an aspect of getting the right thing out for the user, not just for the user, but in that particular incident or issue or whatever their user story is that they're trying to complete. So I see this as a necessary forward path there, where it can only be done because we've spent arguably a huge amount of work in the last 30 years on what is the best UI for a particular user experience that we can have. And without that, I don't think we would have been able to, or Google would not have been able to steal that work. I mean, would not be able to have used research on that work and provide us a new experience there.
Yeah, absolutely. No, but I agree with you. And pretty cool that you're already doing this in your company, actually.
For some things, yeah, absolutely. So one of our products is a Slackbot. So we don't control the UI at all there whatsoever. So no ability to change anything. And the other one is a administrative interface. So we don't have to spend a lot of time on user research or, building out the UI because it's used in, it's a very technical product. The UI is used rarely. Most of the time we're selling an API. So if we need to do things, we care about a very high uptime. So being able to glean into insights, we can spend all of our collective UI and UX juices on designing the best internal monitors that we have. So innovating there is really something we have to do. Okay. So what did I bring today? I had one pick, but I think I'm going to change it based on our conversation. There's a great website run by a couple of UX researchers called growth.design. I'm sure you've heard of it. They have like 30 or 40 different case studies where they went through different applications or UIs and basically tore them apart. Like, what's wrong with this? And not just like what's wrong with it from a user standpoint, but like looking at it through the eyes of a business. It's not just like, oh, a user would think this would want to be different, but realistically, as a business, if you want to make money or capture engagement, et cetera, like what could they have changed and should they change to make that happen? And they are really well done, every single one of them. They do like TikTok and Airbnb and stuff like that. And I think every single time one comes out, it's a good introduction to what UX design goes through, but also even if you are experienced, like just learning about another new interest bias or value that is actually being utilized or abused by certain companies to get you to do what they want in their app.
I truly agree with you. We cannot have like UX cannot stand alone. UX is part of like the bigger picture. It's just a piece in the puzzle, and we really need to better understand.
We were actually able to take insight from a growth.design and something that we were doing. They had a whole case study on optimizing like the login flow. Like if someone signs up and you get an email to your inbox, it used to say forever, oh yeah, like go open your email and click the link. And they're like, that's dumb. You should at least figure out which provider they're utilizing and then automatically provide, display buttons so they can click on the appropriate one and go to that page. We're like, why is this just research? We're an auth provider. We could just make these buttons, make it automatically work. And so now we have like a whole part of our application which automatically like uses the MX records to figure out which email provider someone is utilizing and then automatically redirect them to their mailbox to click the link, because getting stuck on this screen is just like one of the worst user experiences ever. And I really thought this was quite insightful.
Absolutely. And it will absolutely not help your conversion rate. So just go
It's
fix.
really bad. They're talking about like even having the right buttons there, like boost the conversion rate like by a 30% extra on top, which is like amazing to start with. And then taking it the extra steps that we did has just been such a game changer in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I hesitate to bring up that new topic here. So maybe we'll stop here for the episode. Thank you so much, Elise, for coming and joining with us today and talking about everything there is to do with UX.
At least part of it. But yeah, thank you for having me. And then we can always continue diving even more into this space and other spaces as well. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. We may need to get you back on the show. And thank you so much to Incident.io for sponsoring today's episode. And thank you for the listeners. And hopefully we'll be back again next week.